She became the first black female billionaire in history. Her TV show reigned for 25 consecutive years. Now, presidents sought her opinion. When she recommended a book, it became a bestseller overnight. The entire world knew her smile, her voice, her presence that transformed everything it touched. But there's a truth the cameras never fully captured. Behind that billion-dollar empire stands a woman who was repeatedly violated from age 9 to 14. A teenager who got pregnant at 14 and carried the guilt as if the horror was her fault. A public figure who spent decades battling her own body while the whole world watched and judged. Oprah Winfrey built an empire, but the price was written in wounds no success could heal. Loneliness and $50 million mansions. Silent nights despite being loved by millions. A 30-year relationship that never became a marriage. And a TV network that nearly bankrupted her after 25 years of absolute dominance. How did a child who wore dresses made from potato sacks become the most influential woman in American television? What did she sacrifice to get there? Why does someone with so much power still feel invisible? And what's the real cost of becoming a legend when you started life as nobody's choice? But before we answer these questions, we need to go back to the beginning, because to understand the empire, you need to know the girl who survived what should have destroyed her. Oprah Gail Winfrey was born on January 29, 1954, in the forgotten rural town of Kosciuszko, Mississippi. A place where poverty was not an exception but the rule, and where dreams were luxuries no one could afford. Her arrival was not celebrated, it was barely acknowledged. Mother Verita Lee was an unmarried teenage housemaid, just 18 years old, already overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. Her father, Vernon Winfrey, was a soldier stationed elsewhere, unaware for months that he even had a daughter. His very existence was an accident, an inconvenience, a burden. Name itself was a mistake. Her mother intended to name her Orpah after a biblical figure, but the midwife misspelled it on the birth certificate. Even her identity began with an error no one bothered to correct. For the first 6 years of her life, Oprah lived with her grandmother Hattie Mae on a farm so poor that she wore dresses stitched from potato sacks. Other children mocked her. She had no toys, no books, only chores that left her hands raw and her spirit dimmed. Her grandmother was strict, often harsh, wielding discipline with a switch that left welts on Oprah's legs. But Hattie Mae also taught her to read by age 3, using the Bible as her only textbook. In those worn pages, Oprah found the first hint of escape. Words became her refuge. Stories became the only place where she was not hungry, not poor, not unwanted. At age 6, everything shattered. Her grandmother could no longer care for her, and Oprah was sent to live with her mother in Milwaukee. Vernita had moved north seeking opportunity, but found only more struggle. She worked long hours as a maid, leaving Oprah in the care of relatives and family friends. That is when the nightmare truly began. At 9 years old, Oprah was raped by her 19-year-old cousin. It was not a single incident. It happened again and again. Then came an uncle, then a family friend. Each time she was told to stay silent. Each time the shame burrowed deeper. Years later, Oprah would confess with devastating honesty. I was sexually abused from the time I was 9 years old until I was 14. I didn't know what was happening to me. I blamed myself, Tit. She carried that blame like a stone tied around her neck. The adults who should have protected her either did not notice or chose not to see. Her mother, exhausted and distant, seemed unreachable. Oprah learned early that her pain did not matter, that her voice had no power, that survival meant silence. School became her only sanctuary. Teachers noticed something unusual about the quiet girl with the haunted eyes. She was brilliant, reading at levels far beyond her age, speaking with a precision and poise that seemed impossible given her circumstances. But even there, she felt invisible, just another poor black girl in a system designed to overlook her. At home, the abuse continued. She would later describe those years with a rawness that still cuts. I lived in fear every single day. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know if I would ever be safe. By age 13, the weight became unbearable. Oprah began acting out, running away, shoplifting small items just to feel something other than the numbness that had swallowed her whole. Mother, overwhelmed and unable to cope, made a decision that would alter Oprah's trajectory forever. She sent her daughter to Nashville to live with her father, Vernon Winfrey. Vernon was strict, demanding, and unyielding. A barber and deacon, he ruled his household with an iron fist. But unlike the chaos of Milwaukee, there was structure, there were rules, there were expectations. For the first time in years, someone seemed to care whether Oprah lived or died. Yet even that stability came too late to stop what happened next. At 14 years old, Oprah discovered she was pregnant, the result of the abuse she had endured for years. The shame was suffocating. She tried to hide it, wearing baggy clothes, praying the nightmare would somehow disappear. But secrets that heavy cannot stay buried. When her father finally discovered the truth, the disappointment in his eyes was almost worse than the abuse itself. The baby was born prematurely and died within weeks. Oprah would later say, "I thought that baby's death was my punishment for being a bad girl." In those words lies the cruelest truth of her childhood. A little girl, violated and broken, blamed herself for horrors inflicted upon her by adults who should have been her protectors. The trauma did not end when the abuse stopped. Music wove itself into the fabric of her identity, the shadow she would spend decades trying to outrun. Her childhood was not a foundation, it was a battlefield. And the scars carved into her soul during those years would shape every choice. Music, every ambition, every desperate climb toward a life where no one could ever make her feel powerless again. The pregnancy was Oprah's darkest secret, a ticking time bomb she carried with terror and shame. At 14 years old, her body was changing in ways she could not hide much longer, and the weight of what was happening crushed her spirit music more than any physical burden ever could. She did not tell anyone, but not her mother, still distant in Milwaukee, not the adults at school music who praised her intelligence but never saw the desperation behind her eyes, and certainly not Vernon, the father who had taken her in but whose strict discipline made her fear his disappointment more than anything else. For months she wore oversized clothes, avoided mirrors, and prayed in silence that somehow the nightmare would end. But nightmares do not disappear because we wish them away. When Vernon finally discovered the truth, the confrontation was devastating. There was no sympathy, no tenderness, only the cold shock of betrayal in his eyes. How could this happen? Why could she disgrace the family like this? Die. The questions cut deeper than any answer she could give. Because the truth that she had been violated repeatedly for years was a truth she did not yet have the strength to speak aloud. In February 1968, Oprah gave birth prematurely to a baby boy. He was fragile, barely clinging to life, and within 2 weeks, he died. For most people, the death of an infant is an unbearable tragedy. For Oprah, it felt like divine punishment. She later confessed with heartbreaking honesty. Music. I thought that baby's death was God's way of telling me I'd been a bad girl. I felt relief, and then I felt ashamed for feeling relief. That confession reveals the deepest wound of her adolescence. Not just the trauma of the abuse or the loss of the baby, but the crushing belief that she deserved it all. That somehow she had brought this suffering upon herself. In the weeks that followed, Oprah withdrew into silence. She went through the motions of daily life, attending East Nashville High School, sitting in church beside Vernon. But inside she was hollow. The girl who once read voraciously and spoke with confidence now felt like a ghost haunting her own existence. But Vernon Winfrey refused to let her disappear. In his rigid, uncompromising way, he demanded excellence. There would be no excuses, no self-pity, no surrender. Every week Oprah was required to read books and write reports. Every Sunday she recited scriptures in church. Every evening there were rules, structure, expectations. It was harsh, but it was also paradoxically the lifeline she needed. Slowly, painfully, something inside her began to shift. School teachers noticed her again, not as a troubled girl with a dark past, but as a student with a gift for language, for public speaking, for holding a room captive with nothing but her voice. She joined the debate team and drama club, discovering that on stage she could become someone else, someone powerful, someone seen. Her English teacher, a woman named Jeannie Music Wright, saw something more. She pulled Oprah aside one day and said, "You have a voice people need to hear. Don't waste it." Those words, simple as they were, planted a seed that would grow into a forest. In 1970, at just 16 years old, Oprah entered and won a public speaking contest sponsored by the local black radio station WVOL. The prize was a scholarship. But more importantly, it was recognition. For the first time in her life, someone was applauding her, not out of pity or obligation, but because she had earned it. The station offered her a part-time job reading news on air. It paid $100 a week, more money than she had ever seen. But the real reward was not financial. Even after decades in the spotlight, Oprah Winfrey's life remains a study in contradiction. She is one of the most recognized women on earth, yet she has often spoken about feeling unseen. She has interviewed presidents, celebrities, spiritual leaders, and survivors of unimaginable pain. Yet she has admitted that understanding herself has been the hardest interview of all. The empire she built stands as proof of what is possible when talent meets relentless discipline. But it also stands as a monument to the sacrifices required to sustain that level of success. When the Oprah Winfrey Show ended in 2011, many assumed she would finally rest. Instead, she stepped into a different phase of influence. She conducted high-profile interviews that shaped cultural conversations, including candid sit-downs with public figures whose stories reverberated globally. Her words still carried weight. When she spoke, headlines followed. The Oprah effect did not disappear with her daytime show. It evolved, yet stepping away from daily television forced her into a confrontation she had long postponed. Without the structure of constant production, she had space to reflect. Was she without the applause? Without the audience? Without the weekly rhythm of confession and catharsis? For so long her identity had been fused with performance. In stillness, unresolved questions surfaced. She has described this period as both liberating and unsettling. Success had always been motion. Now she had to learn how to exist without. Proving herself every day, her friendships became more intentional. She leaned deeply into her bond with Gayle King, one of the few people who knew her before the empire. With Gayle, she could be unguarded, ordinary, imperfect. That kind of safety is rare for someone whose name is a global brand. Oprah has often said that trust is the most valuable currency in her life now. Not money, it's not ratings. Trust. Spiritually, she has described her journey as ongoing. Faith was planted early by her grandmother's Bible readings. But over the years, it expanded beyond doctrine into a broader understanding of connection and consciousness. She explored meditation, gratitude practices, and conversations about intention and purpose. For Oprah, spirituality became less about religion and more about alignment, about living in integrity with the truth of who she is. It was a quiet evolution far removed from studio lights. Aging, too, has reshaped her perspective. In her 70s, she speaks with more softness and less urgency. The drive that once kept her working 16-hour days has eased, she has acknowledged. That ambition, while powerful, can also be armor. For much of her life, building was protection. She was producing, achieving, conquering. She did not have to feel the vulnerability beneath it. Now, she allows herself to slow down. She gardens. She cooks for close friends. She walks her property in silence. These are small acts, but for someone who once equated stillness with danger, are radical. Her philanthropic work continues to anchor her. The girls at her leadership academy remain central to her sense of legacy. Watching them graduate, pursue careers, and build families of their own brings a satisfaction no award ever could. In them, she sees proof that cycles can be broken. Yet, trauma does not have to be destiny. But a girl from poverty can rise and then reach back to lift others. Still, she does not romanticize her journey. She has acknowledged regrets, moments when she prioritized work over relationships, when exhaustion blurred her judgment, when public approval mattered more than private peace. She understands now that being a legend often requires becoming larger than life, and that largeness can create distance from ordinary intimacy. There were birthdays missed, quiet evenings sacrificed, spontaneous joys postponed for production schedules. Those choices built the empire. They also narrowed parts of her personal world, and yet she does not frame her life as tragedy. It is complexity she emphasizes, pain and privilege coexisting, gratitude and longing sharing the same space, triumph standing beside tenderness. Oprah's story resists simple conclusions because her life has never been simple. She is neither victim nor invincible icon. She is a woman shaped by early wounds who refused to let those wounds dictate her ending. What remains most striking is her refusal to be silent, from that pivotal moment when she revealed her abuse on live television to her continued advocacy for education and equity. She has consistently chosen transparency over secrecy. That choice altered not only her trajectory, but the cultural landscape. Conversations once whispered in shame moved into daylight. Survivors found language for experiences they had buried. That may be her most enduring impact. Not the ratings, not the billions, but the permission she gave others to speak. In the end, Oprah Winfrey's life is not defined solely by wealth or influence. It is defined by resilience layered over vulnerability. By a voice that once trembled in fear and later commanded global attention. By a child who felt disposable and grew into a woman who proved her existence mattered. Some nights, she may still wrestle with questions about sacrifice and solitude, but every morning she rises into a reality she created from fragments of pain and fragments of hope. Her legacy is not perfection, it is persistence. It is the audacity to believe that beginnings do not dictate endings. It is the understanding that even if some battles are fought in silence, survival itself is a form of victory.